a brick building on the east bank of the Willamette River in Portland, Oregon. Two steam locomotives sit about 40 feet apart inside it. In May of 2025, a crew member named Jim Vanderbeck stood beside the larger one and confirmed there was water and fuel in the tender. That was the first fire in that boiler in nearly 10 years. Both of those machines went into a federal inspection in 2015. The smaller one was pulling passengers again inside of about 2 years. Every mainline steam locomotive in this country answers to the same federal rulebook, and it does not ask who owns you. Have you ever watched a rule get applied perfectly fairly and ruin somebody anyway? Put it in the comments. This is the kind of thing American Iron Works takes apart. Subscribe so the next one reaches you. The rulebook is called 49 CFR Part 230. It took effect in January of 2000, and it governs every steam locomotive that turns a wheel on a main line in the United States. The rule behind it was published on the 17th of November, 1999, replacing a patchwork of standards that reached back to the steam era itself. It has been rewritten since, quietly. On the 1st of July, 2025, the Federal Railroad Administration amended Part 230 without public comment, pulling every inspection filing in the country away from its regional administrators and into one office. The agency classified the change as deregulatory and described its total costs as less than zero. The signature belongs to Kyle D. Fields, the agency's chief counsel. A single desk in Washington now holds the paperwork for every operating steam locomotive in America. The core of it is a number, 1,472. That figure counts service days, and the definition of one matters more than it sounds. A service day is any calendar day the boiler carries steam pressure above atmospheric with a fire in the firebox. Sitting cold in a museum does not count. Pulling a train does. At 1,472 service days, or at 15 calendar years, whichever arrives first, the locomotive comes apart. The clock starts. The day the machine enters service, or 365 days after the first flue tube goes in, whichever comes first. A restoration shop is on a federal deadline from the moment it installs one tube. That teardown is the last rung of a ladder rather than a single event. A crew checks the machine daily before it moves. Inspections fall due at 31 days and again at 92. An annual comes around within 368 days of the last one, and every fifth annual adds an examination of the flexible stay-bolt caps. These locomotives answer to the rulebook constantly. The 15-year mark is simply the rung where answering gets expensive. The federal government requires 4 specific things at that mark, and they are printed in Appendix A to the regulation. First, the boiler flues come out and the interior gets cleaned. An inspector then strips the jacket and the lagging so the steel barrel is visible from both sides. The vessel gets filled with water and pressurized past its working limit in what is called a hydrostatic test. Last, somebody measures the remaining thickness of that steel, recalculates the pressure the boiler is still rated to carry, and files a new specification card with the Federal Railroad Administration. Pulling the flues means cutting their ends off with a torch. They do not survive the process. Any locomotive that enters a 1,472 inspection is getting new tubes whether it needed them or not. Wilmington and Western's 0-6 NEO number 58 carries 278 of those tubes. Each is 2 inches across and 12 feet long. That is a small switcher, and the count on a machine the size of 4014 runs far higher. When Big Boy number 4014 took its hydrostatic test at Cheyenne in February of 2019, the crew brought the boiler to 375 pounds per square inch. A passenger car tire carries about 35. They took a riveted steel vessel built in 1941 to more than 10 times that and held it there. The part of this I find hard to get past is that half the rule has nothing to do with wear. Run a locomotive 20 days a year, and after 15 years, you have used about 300 of your allotted days. The boiler still comes down. Union Pacific's own published figure for 4014 is 260 days on the rails across 9 tours since 2019, which means the calendar is going to reach that machine long before the service days do. The rule is identical for every operator in the country. Who has to answer it is not. Now go back to Portland, because the 2 locomotives from the opening of this video are the cleanest experiment this subject allows. 4449 went into its teardown and was back under steam in roughly 2 years. Its stablemate, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle number 700, went in the same year and did not steam again until the 10th of May, 2025. Almost a decade. The bill came to nearly $500,000, and a grant of $29,000 from the Emory Rail Heritage Trust was publicly credited with a major role in finishing it. When $29,000 decides whether a locomotive runs, you are not operating a railroad. You are running a bake sale with a boiler. Both machines sat under one roof, answering the identical rulebook. One took 2 years, the other took 10. Nothing in the rulebook explains that gap, because the rulebook is not where the answer lives. Big Boy number 4014 weighs 1.2 million pounds. 25 were built, and it is the only one that still moves under its own steam. It was retired in December of 1961 with 1,031,205 miles behind it, then sat on a fairground in Pomona, California for more than 50 years. Union Pacific took it back in 2013 and towed it 1,293 miles to Cheyenne. Norfolk and Western No. 611 came out of the railroad's own Roanoke shops in 1950. That machine has done this before. It was retired in 1959 and parked in a Roanoke City Park in 1962. Norfolk Southern pulled it out and overhauled it in 1981, ran it until December of 1994, then shut the program down and parked it again. Getting it running a third time took a campaign called Fire Up 611, which asked the public for $3.5 million. Norfolk Southern put in $1.5 million of that, and the railroad raised its share by selling a Mark Rothko painting. Southern Pacific number 44449 was built by Lima Locomotive Works in 1941, the last survivor of 28 GS4 locomotives. 3 of the most recognizable machines in American railroading, and 3 completely different owners. Number 4014 belongs to Union Pacific, a Class 1 railroad running a dedicated steam shop inside an active Cheyenne rail yard, in a state where the company employs close to 800 people. Even a Class 1 is not immune to the timeline. Union Pacific pulled its own number 844 out of service on the 21st of July, 2013, for what started as a tube problem and grew into a full 1,472 inspection. The locomotive did not haul anything again until the 23rd of July, 2016. 3 years inside the best equipped steam shop on the continent with salaried machinists on the payroll. 611 belongs to the Virginia Museum of Transportation, a non-profit in Roanoke. 4449 belongs to the city of Portland and is kept running by volunteers who call themselves the Friends of SP 4449. In September of 2025, the Roanoke Museum partnered with an auction house and began selling cab rides on 611. Winning bidders had to be 18 to sit in the jump seat. The proceeds go toward a federal inspection due in 2030. That is a museum starting a fundraising campaign 5 years early to pay for 4 items on a government checklist, which brings up the obvious problem with the title of this video. In February of 2020, Union Pacific told the members of its own steam club that it was cutting back steam and heritage operations. The reason given was precision scheduled railroading. Challenger number 3985 was retired in that same announcement and never ran again. It was later donated to a non-profit in Illinois. The Cheyenne shop survived. The Challenger did not. Having a railroad behind you is not a permanent condition. It is a line item on somebody's budget, and line items get cut in February by people who have never seen the machine. So, which would you rather have holding the deed, a corporation or a room full of volunteers? There is one more thing none of these 3 owners will tell you. Union Pacific has never published what the 4014 restoration cost, not once, in all the years since that locomotive came back. Roanoke is barely better. The museum's marketing director put the 611 work somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000 and declined to give a tighter figure than that. The inspection findings are worse. Every result gets filed with the Motive Power and Equipment Division of the Federal Railroad Administration on Form Number 3 and Form Number 4, and none of it is published anywhere. The 3,000 people in 18 countries who paid to bring 611 back cannot find out what it bought. Money is only half the problem. The regulation asks for something that money does not reliably buy. Part 230 requires that these inspections be performed by an individual competent to conduct them. The regulation says that repeatedly. It never once explains where that individual is supposed to come from. In practice, they come from a list that keeps getting shorter. Cherry George has worked on 611 since the 1980s, and she fires it as a volunteer. Scott Lindsay of Steam Operations Corporation ran the 611 rebuild at Spencer, North Carolina, and stood in front of the stripped locomotive, explaining the work to busloads of visitors, most of them gray-haired. Doyle McCormack, a retired Union Pacific engineer, led the Friends of SP 4449 for decades. Jim Vanderbeck is the man from the beginning of this video, checking a tender before a fire that had been 10 years coming. Ed Dickens runs Union Pacific's heritage operations, and he drives 4014 himself. That is 5 people holding up a national fleet. The regulation has no succession plan written into it anywhere, and I have not found a single person in this field who calls that a solved problem. The deadlines are already sitting on the calendar. 611 comes due in 2030. So does 4449 on the opposite side of the country. 2 non-profits, roughly 2,600 miles apart, with no shared fund and no relationship between them, are walking toward the same calendar year. Line it up. A Portland engine house where identical rules produced a 5-fold difference in downtime. 4 items on a checklist that cost one owner $500,000. 9 tours and 260 days of fire under 4014 since 2019. All of it points at one fact that took me an embarrassingly long time to see. From the 15th of June to the 30th of June, 2026, Big Boy number 4014 sat at Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania, next to Big Boy number 4012. It was the first time 2 of these machines had stood together since the class was in service. 4012 has no federal deadline. It is not on a clock, it will not be torn down in 2030 or in 2040, and Part 230 asks nothing of it at all. 4014 took a boiler wash during that visit, and every single day of that reunion counted against its allowance. 2 identical machines, 16 days side by side, and only the living one was being spent. 25 big boys were built, and 8 survived. 7 of them got permanence, and everyone earned it by never moving again. The 8th got a career. The thing that saved 4014 is the same thing consuming it. Fame is what pulled it off a fairground in Pomona and put it inside the Cheyenne shop. That same reputation fills the tour schedule every year. A full schedule is what burns the days off the clock. A locomotive loved enough to run is a locomotive on a countdown, and the ones nobody fought for are the ones that will still be sitting there in 100 years. A line buried in section 230.18 says an owner whose locomotive ran 0 days still has to file a report every January, or the government stops considering it active. Paperwork, not fire, is what keeps these machines legally alive. Once you notice that, you start seeing the same arrangement inside every institution you have worked for. That is what American Iron Works does. Subscribe, because the next one is about the waiver petition that tried to change this rule, and what the Federal Railroad Administration did with it.